Well, whenever we jump into one of our Critical Role discussions, we always like to do a little bit of a recap, just because they're about 4-hour long episodes. So if you're watching just the recap, we do cut this out and put it as a separate video. And then down in the episode description, we have the link to our full thoughts. And we want to know your full thoughts as well for this episode. But having said that, this was episode number 65. Oh, you know the name?
A Path of Vengeance.
A Path of Vengeance. And this episode opens up with our guest characters having recently departed. And the party kind of takes a moment to have a little bit of a more intimate conversation of like, okay, we kind of know the facts of what happened, but like vibe check. How's everybody doing? And much that has been memed and joked about the trauma that Team AOL went through. There's a bit of... I think it's FCG or someone's like, all right, let's go. And Ashton's like, we've been through some stuff. Like, we can't just like in a very peppy way, just get going. Laudna especially is like, it was very hard and traumatic for us. And there's a little bit of a back and forth on like, well, like, are you guys good? Like, what needs to happen? And finally, what the party settles on is led by Ashton. We really need a day to kind of decompress, take care of some business, check a couple of boxes, and then we can continue on our way. Also, additionally, another reason that they need to take another day is because Imogen's staff doesn't have enough charges to it to actually teleport them anyway. So the party decides to split up and all take care of business separately. We have Imogen and Laudna, who are going to go check on Zidana. We have FCG and Ashton, who are going to go check on Milo. And then the remaining three, Chetney, Fern, and Oram, are going to go check in with Ajit Dial is that the right name? Ajit, at the Dial Hall. Mm-hmm. Okay, yeah, right. All of a sudden I was like, wait, is it named after him? For me for a second. So first things first, Ashton and FCG head over to Milo's place. And Ashton's going to give Milo basically a note for some kind of a modification to his hammer. And basically says, hey, like, how fast can you get this done? And Milo's like, if it's a rush job, maybe by tomorrow afternoon. And Ashton's like, okay, great. We're here for another day anyway. And he pays him 100 gold for this custom job on his hammer. Around this time, FCG is making some small talk with him and is like, hey, so like, what's your take on everything? And Ashton basically says, through what they've been through in Asilra recently, it's really made them think about things and think about the world and think about their place in it, and has kind of like given them a new outlook on life, to which FCG shares that they really admire Ashton and admire this newfound sense of purpose from them. Separately, we have Imogen and Laudna, who head to Zudana's house, and Zudana is happy to see them, still has their spare room for them. And the two of them basically offer to get her some groceries and really just kind of try to help her around the place. Before they depart, though, Imogen and Laudna finally have a moment, just the two of them. And Laudna sort of confesses that she feels like a terrible person because of what they went through in Asilra, but especially her killing Bordor. She asks Imogen, like, am I a bad person? And Imogen, interestingly enough, not able to read Laudna's thoughts, finally asks, can I kiss you? And they have this very sweet moment. The table erupts in amazement as they kiss one another. And they sort of reflect on like where they've come from and where they're going. Laudna admits that she thinks Delilah's back, that she welcomed Delilah back in, and that she feels guilty for this because they went through so much to get rid of Delilah. And Imogen says, we can get rid of it. Together we will. And Laudna basically says, well, I don't know if I want to because we might need this power. And Imogen admits that she's also had reservations about getting rid of this whole Ruidus plan because the power is very tempting. They move on to get groceries, and it's out in the streets of Jrusar that they come across this fountain with a crowd of people gathered around it, and this ethereal projection of Ludinus, who is sort of preaching to the crowd and advising them to sort of cast off the burdens of the gods and essentially join up with them. Some guards rush in and destroy this little device, this crystal beacon of some kind. I think Imogen and Laudna take like a fragment of it as well before bringing the groceries back to Zidana's house. And then finally, the last group, the three who went to meet with Ajit Dial, they meet up with them outside of the hall and basically are like, hey, give us the lowdown. Like, what's been happening here? They find out that the leader of Ank'Harel, Sanam...
Jaman Sa'ord.
Jaman Sanor, thank you, had been here in Jrusar, and that essentially a lot of these leaders are getting together and they are bound to go to the Hellcatch Valley, and they're trying to do so as one banner. As she talks about, they've even involved the Stratos Throne, trying to get them to help as well. But there are rumors around Jrusar about the Stratos Throne actually being behind this whole thing. Conspiracies, doomsayers talking about there's another coming calamity. And Ajit basically says that if things aren't done soon, he's fearful of there even being violence and mayhem in the streets. They ask Ajit if he knows anyone who could possibly look at the harness that they picked up from Alesmir. And Ajit comes out with a mentor of his, though I can't remember the name, who effectively looks at the item and eventually says, this is so interesting, I have no idea what it is. And then asks to leave to go finish his soup. The party then decides, okay, we've gotten some good information. And as they begin heading back to meet up, they want to stop by one of the temples in Jrusar. But on the way, they catch the smell of a meat pie, which Matt describes to Chetney as the best smelling meat pie he's ever experienced. He has to make a wisdom saving throw and then presumably fails before launching into a full gallop towards the location of this meat pie. He turns a corner and finds a small, either halfling or gnome, I can't quite remember, maybe dwarf.
It's dwarf.
Dwarf, who throws this pouch of like an herb almost that he bites into and then throws a net of silver over him before Fern, in pursuit, winds the corner and casts Blight on him. And that is where we go to break.
Yeah, so I imagine it like catnip for werewolves.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
So we pick back up after the break with this encounter basically going on. We have a dwarf bounty hunter, essentially, who is yelling at Fern to stay back, like, this is my business, like, just stay out of it. And like Blake said, Fern just immediately casts Blight on this dude, and we roll initiative. So as combat goes on, Chetney is basically trying to get out of this silver net, but he's struggling. And the dwarf explains that there's a large bounty on Chet's head, basically, and that Chet is a problematic cursed beast. Excuse me. The dwarf, again, having Chetney in a net, is able to kind of dart away into an alley, dragging Chetney behind him. When Fern begs, basically just like, oh, well, just let me give him a goodbye kiss, please. And she rolls a 28 on the on the roll. So the dwarf is like, okay, like, say your goodbyes, I guess. So she runs up and kisses Chet, casting stone skin on him in the process. And the dwarf just then continues to drag Chetney away. Meanwhile, Orem is attacking the net, trying to get Chet out. But the dwarf casts Charm Person on Orem and is successful. So Orem now regards, this guy as a friend. It's at this point that Fern sends Mr. up to Chetney, and using Mr. is able to bamf Chetney out of the net. Chet immediately casts invisibility, and the dwarf scurries into the shadows as he's starting to look a bit rough from just the damage they've all been doing to him during this process. Orem, still under the Charm Person spell, is like trying to mediate, being like, why are we attacking each other, guys? We're all friends. Um, and Chet is kind of briefly explaining what just happened there, and we're told that this was in reference to the shopkeeper that Chetney attacked the last time they were in Jrusar.
Ever ago.
Yeah, forever ago. Um, and Orem does a perception check while they're kind of talking in this alleyway and can see that the dwarf is on one of the nearby roofs watching them. And Orem is like, "Hey, friend, like we never got your name," and the dwarf just runs away. The trio then decide, like, okay, like that was crazy, but we don't have time to like dilly dally here, and so they make their way to the Dusk Maven's temple. So they go inside, and there's one figure inside, kind of wearing, dark robes and a hood, and I think a veil even as well. And Orem just says, "Hey, we have a lot of questions about everything going on." And this priest says, yeah, everything's kind of messed up right now, and the fear you are feeling is felt by everyone. And Fern asks, "Have you been in communication with the Raven Queen, with the Dusk Maven?" And the figure says, "The gods are in the same boat as we are. They're there's not like a direct communication, but there's communication in ways, and they're just trying to survive like we are, and our fates are intertwined with theirs." So they kind of have this mini conversation, and then this priest basically offers them to drink of the waters that are in this temple. There's like this pool of water, and the three of them agree to it, and so they each take some of this water. And it's very cold but refreshing, and they kind of just like sit and meditate almost. An amount of time passes, but they're not aware how long. Could have been a minute, could have been an hour, but they like are still. And when they like look to or come to from this, the figure is gone, and it's just the three of them in this chamber. So they're like, okay, and they decide to make their way out. Except when they open the door, it's not Jrusar that they are greeted with. It is instead the Hellcatch Valley, the excavation site, the Malleus Key. Still, plummeting its beam into Ruidus. But all they can hear is just this scream, and they can see the black orb that's in the Malleus Key. And it's a scream that doesn't stop and is described as echoing through Exandria. The doors then close, but instead of like darkness, it's now a massive vision of this white mask. And then the three of them snap out of the trance that they were in, and they're back in the chamber, and the priest is still there. Fern is like, "What was that?" And the priest says that they're in a period of mourning for one of their own. The three of them then make their leave, and all the groups reconvene at the Spire by Fire, and each catch each other up on what they just went through, basically. And the party realizes that Ludinus has been 20 steps ahead of them the whole time. They know that the shadowy orb figure was connected to Keyleth, and that seemed to be like part of the whole plan, was to get her there to lure him out, and they've just been like patsies in all of this. There's then another, patented God conversation amongst the whole group, like, are they good? Are they bad? Where does everybody stand on this? And they kind of realize that each of them is kind of bringing their own perspective and has their own ideology on this, but even still, they can all work together because, like, at the very least, they can all agree that like Ludinus needs to be stopped, and basically come to the conclusion that the general idea of like, are the gods good or bad, is not black and white. The party then decides to just rest for the night, but before they do, FCG and Fern each scry. With FCG is going to check on Liliana and Fern Ludinus. Ludinus, however, does have the scry prevention, so it doesn't work. Liliana does not, though, so it does work. And FCG gets a vision of Liliana in this massive red storm, and she is walking towards something. And next to her is, in fact, Ludinus, and they are headed toward what appear to be like structures in the distance. But FCG notices in the sky a bluish teal marble, and he realizes that it's Exandria, therefore realizing that they are on the moon. Comes out of this, tells everybody else, and they're like, "Oh gosh." And basically the party goes to sleep for that night. The next morning, Imogen doesn't get enough charges back on her staff, so they still can't teleport today. So they got another day of kind of dilly-dallying. FCG identifies the harness and finds out that it like funnels magic directly into the user's spine. Ashton returns to Milo, who hasn't slept as they've been working on this hammer the whole time, and Milo does finish it, and we'll probably talk about this more during the discussion, but looks really cool and seemingly has an immovable rod installed in it now. Orem then uses Caleb's sending stone to see if that works, but he still can't get through. Imogen decides to cast sending herself to check in on Ira, but it also fails. And FCG then decides, let me just scry on Ira, but that also fails. So Fern is like, well, let me try to scry on Ira. And she is actually successful. And she sees him in the middle of a massive red storm. He is also on Ruidus. And he is approaching this like big rock or big structure. It's kind of obscured by the storm. And he like makes his way inside of it. And inside there's another figure that looks like a Raylora, except they're more humanoid, more like corporeal. Yeah, they're not just like the pure energy that we've seen before. Instead, it's like a living, breathing entity, and it's wearing clothing and armor. And it regards Ira with recognition, and they seem to be communicating telepathically. The party then rests again for the night, so Imogen can get her staff charges back. The next morning comes, she does get those back, and they gather to teleport and successfully make their way to Zephyra, and that is where the episode ends. Again, episode 65 of Campaign 3, Path of Vengeance, Path to Vengeance, something like that. But yeah, if you want to hear our full discussion, which we're about to launch into, it'll be linked down in the description below.